Hi, it's Katie. I'm just going to go through Formal 1 question by question with you guys. Feel free to stop the video, pause it if you need to write notes, etc. I'll be jumping backwards and forwards between the actual formal itself and the mark scheme so you can see kind of where these answers are coming from. I'll also tell you how to be updating your revision materials to get the best out of them, and other exam hints and tips. Also go through the command words as well. So there's lots and lots of different things that we'll go through in these videos. As I said, feel free to pause if you need to make notes. Feel free also as well to jump to the questions that are going to be the most relevant to you. So in this question, we're just going to go through question number 1, which fairly straightforward question. So we have got this question here: describe how the structures of starch and cellulose make how those molecules are related to their functions. So the first thing that we've got to think about is, okay, well, what are the structures of starch and cellulose? And then secondly, we need to think about, well, how are they related to their functions? Unlike at GCSE, where you would get 1 mark for the structure and 1 mark for the functions, at A level, you actually need both of those points to get 1 mark. So it is actually more difficult to get these marks at AS than it is to get them at GCSE. So if you think about this one first, I always like to split this page up into 2. So I personally would split this up into starch, and then lower down I would write cellulose. If you get the examiner on your side and you make it easier for them to mark your work, they're going to be a little bit kinder when it comes to marking. If your answers are really clear, really concise, then there's no ambiguity and there's no sort of should I give this student a mark, should I not? Okay, you need to basically make your answers so clear that you know what you're talking about, that there's no question about whether the examiner is going to give you that mark. So that being said, we're just going to move to the mark scheme. So when we look at the structure of starch, if we were describing the structure of starch, we're simply giving an account of what we would be able to see. And if we're describing the function of starch, then we're just saying what it does. So for the first point, we need to really say that it's helical or spiral. Avoid saying the word coiled, because that is not on this mark scheme. But if you want to use your A-level technical terms, then I would definitely go for helical. So that's a description of its structure. And it's helical, so it is compact, because basically starch is going to be used to store energy within plant cells. And so plant cells are not very big, and we need to get a lot of energy condensed down into a small space. So one of the first things is that starch is helical, so it's compact, or you can say so you can fit a lot into a small space. For point number 2, I would always go with it's insoluble, so it's osmotically inactive, or it does not affect water potential, so it doesn't change water potential either. So I would always go for that one. Now, because it is an energy storage molecule, you need to say what that energy is going to be used for. So when we think about amylopectin is a branch structure, and so it's a branch structure, so glucose is easily released. And that glucose is going to be released for respiration to be carried out. So you need to tell the examiner, okay, well, what's the fate of that glucose that was stored in that starch? And last but not least, another point about starches is that it's actually a relatively large molecule, and so it cannot leave the cell, or you could say it cannot pass the cell surface membrane. Now, on this particular question, there's a potential 5 marks to be got. However, if you only write about starch in your answer, you can only achieve a maximum of 3 out of 5. So even if you wrote down every single one of these points that's outlined here about starch, you will still only receive a maximum of 3 marks. You've got to make sure there's a good balance between your starch and cellulose. I would always go for 3 points about starch, 3 points about cellulose. what you're doing there is you are giving yourself at least 5 bullet points or 5 separate points that you're making about your starch and about your cellulose, and you've got an extra one just in case one of your other ones has slipped off the mark scheme or it's not being credited this year. Okay, so I would always, on these questions, like I said, give 3 points for starch and 3 points for cellulose. You could also mention as well that starch is made out of alpha glucose, but that isn't on this mark scheme, so it wouldn't be credited. It's been on other mark schemes before, so it's worth putting in there. So moving on to cellulose, we've got long, straight, or you can say unbranched chains of beta-glucose. Now, specifically, it is those chains that are joined together with hydrogen bonding. So the way that people have phrased their answers, what they've written doesn't actually mean what they think they've written. So, for example, quite a few students wrote it's comprised of hydrogen bonds. Comprised means it's made up from those things. So what you're saying is literally cellulose is just a bunch of hydrogen bonds. There's nothing else in it. It's just hydrogen bonds. We know that that's not true because we know that the two cellulose fibers, get linked together by hydrogen bonds. So you do need to make sure that what you are writing, as we said before, is very clear to the examiner what you actually mean. So when we join together those individual cellulose fibers via many hydrogen bonds, they form micro or macrofibrils, either or. So that's why we've got the slash in between there. So you need to say that they form fibrils, and the whole point of there being cellulose in the cell wall of plant cells is to provide rigidity or to provide strength. Had quite a lot of people writing about turgidity. Turgidity is all about the movement of water into plant cells, so it doesn't actually answer this question, and so you aren't actually getting any marks for it.